you're not using a very heavy band and doing so in a variety of ranges and at your end ranges and a lot of end range strengthening, then you're missing, where do plyos take you? They take you into ranges that you can't normally get. Where does throwing go? You go into ranges that you don't normally get into. If you don't strengthen at those end ranges that you can actively get on your own and with different perturbation training, then I don't think these guys I don't think are adequately prepared to sufficiently stabilize themselves in these greater ranges.
Hey, this is More Than Velocity. I'm Bart Pear here with Ryan Croton and Jordan Oseguera. And today we're going to talk about a lot of different things, but we're going to focus on rehab and returning to performance and what's involved with that. And we love to have different people on the program that have varied backgrounds. And I wanted to introduce you guys to Luke Novosel today. He is a doctor of physical therapy who's done a lot of different things in sports. Right now, he's with the Mets minor league program down in Port St. Lucie. And Luke, first of all, great to have you on. Why don't you tell us basically what your role is right now?
Yeah, definitely. I want to thank you guys for having me on. It's definitely awesome. I know I've watched some of you guys' podcasts and whatnot before, so definitely put some great stuff out there. So definitely appreciate you guys having me on. So just a little bit about me. So I grew up around Pittsburgh. I went to undergrad and got my DPT from the University of Pittsburgh. I also had the opportunity to play baseball there. I was a pitcher. So that's kind of where my initial interest and kind of passion with baseball kind of sparked with, kind of continuing throughout playing collegiately. And then after PT school, I pursued a sports physical therapy residency at Houston Methodist, where I really developed a kind of a true passion for working in sports. Worked with a number of the Houston-based sports teams down there, which had an awesome experience. Met a lot of great people and learned a lot in a very short period of time. So that was an awesome experience to help to learn a little bit more in depth how to become a sports physical therapist and a little bit more of being less of a generalist and a little bit more of a sports kind of PT from the rehab side of things, and also get introduced to, some of the different disciplines that kind of work within the high performance team. So that was awesome. And then after that, I did my master's in athletic training at Boston University. And again, worked with a lot of great programs and had a great experience up there and learned a little bit more from the acute management things that kind of helped to pair with a little bit of my more, I guess, rehab based background and had the opportunity to do some kind of strength and conditioning stuff up there as well, kind of integrated throughout my clinicals and whatnot. And then I started with the New York Mets primarily as their minor league physical therapist in January, but kind of technically started with them in March when I moved down here. The delay in COVID kind of really helped me to the timing of things to take this job. And I'm super fortunate to have had it so far. So I primarily work as a physical therapist, but I've also held roles throughout the season as a strength and conditioning coach or performance coach, and also as an athletic trainer with the St. Lucie Mets here. So I've kind of had a pretty diverse role. It's kind of integrated me into a bunch of different things, and I've learned a lot, and it's been an awesome experience so far. And I'm looking forward to, seeing where this thing goes.
Very cool. Ryan, I know you are the one who can most relate to what Luke's doing. Why don't you lead us off here?
Yeah. So I think, Luke, the first thing that I wanted to ask you about is, that obviously elbow injuries are a growing epidemic in baseball. And, I've really stuck to more of the biomechanical side, and I do review some strength related data in terms of how these injuries are presenting themselves. But I'd like to see kind of in your experience, you've been there for a little while, what are some things that come to mind in terms of what causes these injuries for your athletes, or what are certain characteristics that you might be seeing in them when they come into you?
Yeah. So I think first off for us, at least specifically with this year and kind of some things that I know last year, obviously with COVID kind of happening, we had a lot of guys, specifically our minor league guys, who had low or poor access to training facilities. So I know that had a significant impact on what these guys look like coming into spring training this year, and really what their progressions look like in terms of how quickly they were ramped up to bullpens and how accurately they were able to follow a lot of the throwing programs. A lot of guys did not come in prepared like they were supposed to. And a lot of guys, who were coming, minor league guys who were coming in, who were fighting for a position, fighting for a spot, it's kind of, you do what you got to do to be healthy and stay healthy, but most importantly, to be on the field. So some of the guys, were progressed a bit quicker than I think they should have been, just because they didn't have access to a catcher to complete some of the throwing programs that they did. So I think the low or poor access to training facilities, I think definitely limited these guys and was a factor this year. We, as a whole, I think, and as a whole, across the MLB, UCL injuries were up this year, and they have been over the past couple of years. And obviously that's been a growing trend, but I think specifically just thinking back to these last couple of years with COVID, that's definitely been a contributing factor. The other one that I definitely have seen with these guys is in terms of weighted balls. Obviously, that's kind of been a big catch, term here in the last couple of years. And I think thinking of how they're implemented in terms of if it's kind of implemented from more of a movement patterning perspective to improve, pitch efficiency and arm mechanics and overall movement patterns versus more of your velocity based, program that might be implemented at the wrong, potentially at the wrong time with the wrong athlete, with poor mechanics, with poor strength and whatnot, that's not necessarily being matched by what they're doing from a strengthening perspective. As we all know, with the weighted balls, you get the quick gain in external rotation and potentially velocity, but you also need to have a subsequent match in their external rotation strength into those new ranges. So if you're not strengthening and stabilizing within the new range that they have, then you're going to be, putting that athlete at an increased risk of injury. So we found a lot of guys have been coming in who have done these weighted ball kind of velocity based training programs, but their rehab, or not rehab, but their arm care programs have not sufficiently matched kind of what they've been doing to help to prep and provide that foundation for them as they're going through these velocity based programs. So I think that's definitely something, we've seen. And then definitely the shoulder and core strength has been something that we noticed specifically this year with guys coming in with very low general shoulder strength and core strength, but also specifically into external rotation. Something here we like to look for something a little bit closer to a 1-to-1 ratio is kind of what we look for. A lot of the stuff in the literature will say somewhere in that 75 to 80%, IR to ER rate or ER to IR ratio. But we like to look for more of a 1-to-1 ratio. And we were having guys coming in like the 50%, 60 percentiles. And, and that obviously is going to lead to, if you don't have a strong and stable shoulder, if potentially you're combining that with poor mechanics and kind of a quick ramp up with COVID and whatnot, then you're going to be setting yourself up for, for potentially injuries and whatnot. So I think that was something that we kind of found that, with all of our spring training initial intake testing that we found with guys. And then I think just in building off of that, the low grip strength is something that we also have seen being a thing. Because obviously I don't think we haven't seen a ton of great ways to necessarily test grip strength outside of your general handheld dynamometer. I know we've been playing with some things. I don't know if you've heard of Flexigrip. I believe it's called. It's a new company with
fingers.
Yeah, exactly. So that's something that we're currently looking into and going to be exploring for this upcoming season as a way to objectively, identify and test the individual strength and endurance of the finger flexor, since we know that is such a big contributing component to the dynamic stability of the UCL to offload torque while they're throwing, specifically with the flexor digitorum superficialis kind of being the big one for that the literature has shown. So I think that's something that hopefully we're going to see with altering how our throwing programs are this year and how we're starting them a bit earlier to get these guys to adapt to the stresses of throwing a little bit over a longer period of time with some lower intensity throwing to really build that good foundation, and then give them a much better foundation as we ramp up intensity closer to spring training. So I think that's going to be, huge for the guys, and also to, just continuing to adapt, some of our, kind of testing methods and what we're looking for. But I think some of those things, and specifically, say this new invention that, Dale and Adam kind of created, I think is going to be big for that, with kind of objectively being able to, map and monitor that, the grip strength throughout the season, which is not something that we've had the ability to monitor and kind of objectively test previously. The general, hand grip strength that the handheld dynamometer, I think, is kind of the best that we have at the moment, but I don't think is kind of where the future needs to be with, with that stuff. So that's definitely something we noticed with guys coming in with very low grip strength numbers. And I think that's also just a general, low exposure to load and kind of knowing what they, need to be doing with the access, maybe what they're doing at specific facilities they're at, or kind of what they're doing on their own. And, I obviously some states are very different than others with what their access to, different places with COVID protocols and whatnot. But, some guys we had in some states were just, they struggled to get access. And obviously then the cost of things with, some, different things happen with some of the salaries and whatnot throughout the season. So kind of put some of these guys in rough shape. So, so I think it's again, with all that being said, I think it's been a number of things, but I think the strength continues to be a big issue, that we see coming into spring training, which is something I think will always be an uphill battle, but something that we're trying to kind of combat as much as we can. And then also too, just, generally with the weighted balls and how they're being implemented and how we're educating our players into, the role that arm care has to play with weighted balls. So, and I also think these training regimens that we have a lot of these guys coming in that are doing these very like performance or functional strength based training regimens. And it's very, it's very different than a lot of the training regimens that we utilize within the organization. So I think one kind of thought that we've put towards for this offseason is making sure guys know and are educated. We had a bunch of lower body injuries that when we're talking to guys, what they were doing in the offseason and why their numbers were low and XYZ, they were doing all these more functional kind of, they weren't really touching weights and they weren't doing a lot of things that they were expected to do when they got here. And that obviously created a mismatch between what they're doing and the preparation that they did there and the athletic qualities that they were developing. And then what we were kind of getting them to do, and then with the access of what you have on the road with the affiliates and whatnot. So I think that kind of played into some of the things why we had, with some of our, performance-based testing that we do at the beginning of spring training, why some of the numbers were so low. And then we were trying to battle that while also they're ramping up activity, but we're also trying to ramp up strengthening to get them to a certain base level of strength. And, and then once you get into actual play, obviously your ability to actually truly strengthen drops a little bit because obviously now you're more into a game focus. So I think it's, we battled that a bit, this year, and I think was more of an off-season kind of focus and from an educational perspective of, really trying to see what these guys are doing, where they are at, and kind of what their goals are, and then trying to match what the organization goals are, and from a performance coaches department's perspective and what their goals are, and trying to figure out how to match that as best as possible. So yeah, I know that was a little bit off track of what you were saying, but
no, it was on, man.
I got a general observation on that as well. When you're talking about kind of a couple things that link together on that is the weighted ball training is you have on one extreme of it. If you only focus on your functional strength, then you miss out on what's going to be needed to survive for a full professional season. Absolutely. You can get through college, you can get through high school if you just focus on functional strength, and you're probably going to get better because a lot of those guys are detrained. But to play at the highest levels is you can't just focus on one type of training. We had Carter Capps on a little while ago, and one of the great things we were talking about on that was, you got to be well-rounded in the way you're training. You got to be able to touch a little bit of everything. Yeah. But when it comes to those weighted ball programs, they're increasing that range of motion, just like you pointed out. And I would say a majority of them are focusing a lot on general strength of lower half production. We're squatting, we're deadlifting. There may be some cleaning involved. There may be some jumping, explosive work. But I think you nailed it perfect. That I think a lot of them don't focus on the actual arm strength aspect of it. Is you see they're doing the shoulder tube. They're doing the Mark Pro or the Compex, and they're flushing those things out, but you're not strengthening the muscles. And if you're gaining that velocity, but you're not gaining strength with that, correct me if I'm wrong, Ryan, but for every mile an hour you gain, you can pretty much guarantee you're going to add force to the arm, right? And if you're not building that robustness to handle that additional force through your shoulder and it's just your legs and your core, and you're strengthening everything around that, and you're assuming that throwing is a strength building process, you're not even shooting at the same target. You're not like, if you're bowling, you're like, your ball's bouncing into the wrong lane, and Ryan knows exactly what I'm talking about, because this guy, they do curling where he's from. But when it comes down to the bowling aspect of it, it's like you got to put the bumpers up and make sure they're at least knocking some pins down and adding in that arm strength and work.
Absolutely.
I don't know if that made any sense. There's my first rant of the day on, we're focusing so much on recovery, but we're never building strength in the exact range of motions that we're going to need to protect ourselves.
Yeah,
oh, sorry, Luke, go ahead, man.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, I know we see that a lot, especially a lot of the clinics that we send a lot of players where there's a significant underloading thing that happens at most clinics and just in a lot of places in general. And I think a lot of guys come back and be like, oh yeah, what'd you do for arm care? It's like, oh yeah, I did all the bands. I did my, 10 pack, all this stuff. And we're just like, and our perspective here, and especially my perspective, is bands are not a sufficient stimulus to provide any kind of true strengthening benefits. And if band should be used for more of a warm up, and not as integrated within say your arm care program, but should not be your primary mode of training. And I think if that is the case, and you're not doing any kind of additional contrast methods of isometric, eccentric, concentric kind of variations with with perturbations, with with a variety of different methods, and with tempos in there to try to create any more of a strength and hypertrophy response. Like, I think a lot of these people, I think, are missing the boat in how their arm care programs are being constructed. And I think that's where a lot of people run into issues in season, and also in their preparatory phase leading up to the season, of what kind of baseline strength they come in with, because they're just doing a ton of banded stuff. And it's like, if you're not using a very heavy band and doing so in a variety of ranges and at your end ranges and a lot of end range strengthening, then you're missing, where do plyos take you? They take you into ranges that you can't normally get. Where does throwing go? You go into ranges that you don't normally get into. If you don't strengthen at those end ranges that you can actively get on your own and with different perturbation training, then I don't think these guys I don't think are adequately prepared to sufficiently stabilize themselves in these greater ranges, during these weighted ball training programs, or during, or during pitching as a whole, and kind of being able to then sustain that throughout the season. Because, you get acute losses, soft tissue adaptations and strength losses immediately after you pitch. And that can be after just 20, 25 pitches of throwing. So if we're not creating and utilizing and enforcing these arm care programs, and then they're doing all these weighted balls and throwing, and they're not adequately maintaining that strength base, and also from a general soft tissue perspective, I don't think, I think that's a huge boat that a lot of people miss, especially, in these, with other kind of outside PT clinics, but also in some of these performance places that are trying to provide holistic care of what they're doing. But if you're not really including a good arm care program, I don't think you're including a good holistic approach to that athlete to prepare them for the demands of that upcoming season.
You pointed another thing out there. You're saying they don't give the stimulus you need with the bands. And Ryan, I'm sure you can give a little more context to this, but this is just my observation as being a pitching coach and being on the outside looking in to a lot of the medical and the strength community. Is it seems like a lot of those private clinicians, when they're getting someone ready, a lot of minor leaguers train at, private PT clinics, things like that, is they're giving them a 1 pound dumbbell, a 2 pound dumbbell, and they're doing these reps, and they're like, well, you're not going to get hurt on my watch. But then they leave and they haven't prepared their tissues to handle a 100-mile-an-hour fastball, or 115 pitches, or pitching back-to-back days, or just going through spring training. Spring training is not an easy thing to go through. You're standing around all day, you're eating crappy food. Maybe it was like that in Port St. Maybe it's not that way for you guys, but where I was at in spring training, the food was just basically fried bacon fat. Ryan can go more in depth on that as well. But they're taking this approach to where they look at the strength coaches and they go, well, you guys are just being, reckless and neglectful. You're asking these guys to lift heavy weights fast. And then the strength coaches are going, you're being neglectful. You're asking them to lift lightweight slow. Like, where is it that we can meet in the middle on this? And Ryan, if you want to give a little more context to what it is I just stated there, I think that would be something cool to talk about.
I can, but I'm telling you, I've been sitting here with butterflies in my tummy just before we go any further.
Because I mentioned the food.
Yeah, all the things that Luke has been talking about. These are things that our company answers, and obviously we're talking about training theory, but we need to be evidence-led. This is an issue. So the biggest problem that I see in baseball, and it's one that, it's everywhere, is that what happens in the off season? our injuries that we see in the game, generally, it's just like what Luke was talking about. Hey, they've come from a weighted ball program. They've had an off season of probably deficient training. We don't know where they're at, and this product that we offer is portable enough that it travels with them, that we don't miss those observations. When I was in my previous position, was director of performance integration for the Angels, I gulped every off season. I prayed, I gulped. We called strength coaches constantly. We communicated with athletes, but they're evaluating different things than what we did in our organization. We're trying to get the athletes to do testing that we believed in the off season, but it wasn't the right mental model for their coaches. There was a big disconnect. And in a world now that we have this technology, it's important that we focus on the distal aspect of throwing. We talk about arm strength. And Jordan, you talk about light and slow, and then fast and heavy, we talked about tempo training and all those kinds of things. This is the reason why we need to be data led. We need to understand what the athlete needs. If the athlete has very low isometric force, we need to improve isometric force. If they don't have great endurance, we need to improve the repetitiveness of maximum strength. We need to be able to have, if they have arm speed issues, if they don't have great arm speed, we need to improve that with eccentrics. We need to improve fascicle length. There's so many things that we can now uncover with this technology. And I'm just excited. Like, it's got to get in the hands of guys like Luke. It's got to get in the hands of people that they want to observe. They want to be able to individualize. We didn't even talk about individualization, but a lot of programs, they're doing something that's general. And I believe that what's happening is we're training athletes. We're under-training them. We're under-preparing them for the game. But we're probably training them into imbalances. That's my biggest concern. And it was my concern when, we had an expensive dynamometry piece when I was with the Angels, and I felt better because now we have some indications like what Luke's saying. We didn't have a player that was 1-to-1, or they were reversed. They had very high ER and very low IR, and we were able to then make those determinations, but there's a long way to go. There's a long way to go. I mean, for those listeners who are listening to this podcast, what he had gone through and his description of what he has seen related to injuries in the elbow, this is unanimous. What he's saying is unanimous. It is everywhere. And it's not just pro baseball. It's happening at the grassroots. And this is the thing. How are we going to put a stop to it? We need to change behavior. We need to start thinking about data and evidence-led approaches. It's available now. We don't need to guess anymore. Luke, you hit on such great things. Athletes gain length in season. They improve their mobility. And then all of a sudden, if they don't have strength, it's like taking a thick rubber band that's like a tire, and you turn it into a thin rubber band that you can pull apart and stretch and stretch and stretch, and it fails. And we need to have this approach. I mean, I put Jordan to the test when he was with the Angels. He was scouring data, every time, every homestand. It was a big dump of data because we collected details on our athletes. And when they would get hurt? They get hurt on the road. A lot of our athletes got hurt on the road because we weren't being responsive enough with our observations. And this is the thing, the off season and when they're not around the team, is a big worry. And I mean, one of the things that happened with our previous coordinator, and I'm thinking of you, Luke, because physical therapists, for people that don't know what physical therapy is like inside the walls of a major league team, especially at the minor league level, if you have tons of injuries, you can burn a dude out or a woman out. You can burn them out by having too many injured athletes, because now you're caring for more than 20 kids and you're trying to give them individualized attention. And so I can just see this helping because it's player led, and maybe Luke, you could kind of talk to us, because we need to get a perspective from you. You're an athletic trainer, you're a physical therapist, about how time consuming it can be to collect data on your athletes, especially if you don't have interns and those kinds of people doing it for you.
Yeah, no, I think that's a huge barrier, especially for those, say, for example, for athletic trainers at the affiliate levels where they don't potentially have as many hands or access. We obviously here at the facility, we can normally grab a little bit more and have some more access to some of that stuff, because everything is always here. People are here, but at the affiliates, that is a huge challenge to make sure you're staying up with, assessing all of the objective measures that we set forth for, the affiliate kind of staff to kind of make sure they're testing. So that's definitely a challenge, but I think that's probably one of the things that I know we're going to be continuing to revamp, is how we can make that the most accessible, and what is the minimum we need to test, but also what we need, the minimum, but the maximum we need to achieve, to get value out of, that we're actually be able to practically use and apply to our athletes.
Yeah.
So give me an idea. I mean, obviously ERIR, what are you trying to test and evaluate in general? When they show up day one?
So some of the things we test, we normally take guys through like a MSK testing. So we'll normally do that. Normally entails an upper extremity and lower extremity kind of range of motion and strength evaluation. So normally we'll look at shoulder, ER, IR. We'll look at horizontal crossbody adduction. We'll look at flexion pinned, pinning the scapula down, also flexion unpinned. We'll look at hips, ER, IR. We'll look at straight leg raise with a core brace. Ankle range of motion. We'll do some portions of the SFMA top tier. We'll do the grip strength assessment with the handheld dynamometer. We utilize this testing called it's a Tindec. It's basically a portable kind of like a dynamometry type based unit that we use for IR and ER assessment. We also use that for core rotation testing and a row and a prone row test. And then we do a isometric mid-thigh pull. We'll do a counter movement jump, and we will do a hamstring like single limb isometric test. And normally that's pretty much the battery that we'll use. And then with that, kind of what Ryan was saying, based on what we get from that data, say specifically within spring training, and then when we're testing these at interval time points, typically every 4 weeks for somebody who's uninjured, every 2 weeks for somebody who's injured. For us, we normally get a lot of these measures done every 2 weeks. We'll create individualized programs for them, because obviously we want to see what initial athletic qualities they have and which ones they don't have, and then how we can kind of blend all that together to build up the necessary foundation to get them on the right maintenance program for them throughout the season, to help to minimize their risk of injury for what we know the demands of the game are going to be, and what those different adaptations are going to be throughout the season. So we definitely individualize each one. Every player has this like individual like prep meeting after spring training, so it gives an athlete a chance to sit down and be like, hey, look, this is kind of where I'm at. This is what I was doing in the off season. This is kind of how I feel like things went. These are my goals for this season from a training standpoint. This is what I've been doing for arm care. And then it's a sit down with the performance staff, with mental skills, with nutrition, with PT, AT, performance coaches, kind of the whole team as a whole. And it gives everybody a chance to kind of talk about, get on the same page, everybody kind of discuss their goals and create one kind of blended plan and blended program together. Because we know, a lot of these guys they're professional athletes. We have to respect things that have gotten them to this level. And a lot of them do a lot of really good stuff. And we don't want to be the ones to be like, oh, we want you should be doing this, you should be doing that. If they're already doing a lot of stuff that's very similar and accomplishing, improving shoulder internal rotation or hip IR, we don't want to then we might want to give them additional options to achieve that same goal. But we want to know that, okay, you're already on a really good program. Maybe adapt this a little bit and give you some ideas that, might happen, and then modify it throughout the season, because it's always a constant fluid process. But everything we do is definitely very individualized, because you can't treat two athletes the same. No two athletes throw the same. No two athletes move the same. It's got to be highly individualized. And a lot of these testing, it's generally done with everybody, but they're all implemented and practically applied in different ways that are going to best promote that athlete's growth and, safety and health.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, you've got to have the athletes buy in, and that's what I was waiting to hear, is the communication process. Once you have that plan out, it seems like you're getting everybody involved. I think that's great.
We definitely have a very much so like a high performance team model here. And that's something that some of my experiences in the past in in various sports, I definitely have not seen a true collaborative high performance team. And I would say we do a very good job here, especially our collaboration with the major league staff is incredible, especially with the major league, with our director of rehab and the assistant physical therapists up there. The communication is awesome and collaboration between them we have is great. From the minor league perspective, we have daily morning meetings every day to talk about each athlete, what they're doing for the day, anything that we've encountered with them, say from each individual department, kind of, is there any kind of concerns that we need to think about or kind of monitor or modify for the next day? Do we need to add in something, take away something? It's definitely a day-to-day thing. So we know exactly what our day is going to look like from, obviously there's some, curveballs that are thrown in there, but for the most part, we know, what we need to do, where we need to be, where the athletes need to be, and what they need to get on a day-to-day basis to, truly be a player development department and also like a high performance team. I think everybody builds off of each other. I'm obviously in the weight room a lot because I thoroughly have a passion for strength and conditioning. Like I love being in there and value everything that performance coach does. I've learned so much from them from a running mechanic standpoint, how to create periodized programs, how to, really just basically create the entire, program from an in-season perspective, and now moving into the off season, and just how you can give them specific restrictions that an athlete might go within, and then how creative they can be to adapt each individual program based on those specific restrictions and grab 6 different exercises based on one little restriction that you give them. So they have all these different training options to achieve a similar goal with things. And it's incredible what, I've learned from our performance coaches here and the value that they provide to the athletes and to the organization as a whole. So I definitely appreciate that with the organization of, with how, with the high performance model, I think kind of is a catch-all term, and I don't think always gets implemented in the right way, but I definitely have learned and seen a lot of great things here, which I think is awesome. Is something I want to continue to promote, throughout the rest of my practice and career, kind of moving forward. But, it's definitely, we don't try to just measure things just to measure. We try to measure things to actually use it and apply it to our athletes and, to provide the best possible chance for them to actually develop as a player, specifically at the minor league level.
There's a lot of good things that got said there. And one of the ones that stood out was, if a player's doing something that's already getting the result you want, you don't take it away. You may give them some additional options of things like, hey, these are some things we would also recommend to go with that. And not every organization, but a majority of organizations, it seems like when a player comes in the door, they're looking at, what can I take from this guy to make him do what I want him to do? And then why is this guy not buying in? He's uncoachable. This player's a jerk. Yeah. It's like, well, you're not allowed to do any of the things you did that we just paid you money for doing. And now when you get here, we're going to tell you how wrong you are and everything. It's like, well, you must be doing something right. You've got to this point without any help from these guys so far, and instead of being collaborative, they're being confrontational and saying, you can't do that. And one of the things that, Ryan, if we need to cut it out, you can tell me. I don't know, Bart will figure that out. I don't know how to work any of this stuff. But one of the things that got a lot of pushback from me and Ryan was we wanted collaboration between all the departments. And Ryan and myself both got told we over communicate on things. They said it's too much communication. We had these meetings, we had these performance, huddles, we had all these things going on. We'd be sitting in there, we'd be talking, we'd be getting hey, here's what this player's been doing. Well, what has he been communicating? Doesn't matter what he's been communicating. This is what it's like, look, we need to know what this guy's talking about. So when those curveballs that you mentioned get thrown, we can at least adjust and hit a foul ball and not strike out, like we need to be aware of what's going on with those guys. And it sounds like, I've talked to a couple guys within the Mets organization within the last 3 months, I'd say. And it sounds like on the coaching staff this is one of the first times. And I've done some consulting with previous groups in the Mets in the past, and this sounds like probably the first time the Mets have actually been a united front, to where previously there'd been situations where it's like, hey, this guy from strength and conditioning has this, who cares? Doesn't matter what he thinks. We're pitching coaches. It's a pitching coach thinks this, doesn't matter. We're strength coaches. We don't need to listen to this guy. To where now there's actually this collaborative process. Maybe I'm completely wrong. Maybe people are just telling me great things. I don't know. No. But it sounds like the Mets are starting to move in that right direction, and they're starting to get the right people in the right positions. They're listening to the player, which is so important, because if you have 300 players in your organization, it might be from 7 different countries between those 300 players. And those 7 different countries have 7 different worldviews, probably 300 different worldviews, and 500 different philosophies somehow between 300 people. And the more they can get those players bought in and pulling on that same rope, the easier it is when there actually needs to be an intervention of, we need to adjust your pitch shape, or we need to change your programming. There's a trust there, as opposed to day one. I'm not going to say the organization in the Northeast that won't allow, they'll draft people that throw curveballs, and then they don't let them continue to throw curveballs once they sign them. And it's like, well, you can only throw a curveball if you're in the big leagues with us. It's like, well, you just paid this guy second round money to not throw. Now he's just a fastball guy. He doesn't have a breaking ball all of a sudden. So it's like that builds the distrust. It burns bridges before you even need to cross one. And it sounds like you guys are going about it in a good way. Long story short.
Yeah, I think definitely there's some significant strides, like you mentioned, that have been made. I know specifically, we use our pitching coaches. I couldn't say, I'll give a shout out to our rehab pitching coach, Kyle Driscoll. He is literally one of the most knowledgeable people in terms of pitching with mechanics, how to use weighted balls to improve movement patterning, and what he knows about the analytics of pitch shape and kind of what things look like. And I've learned so much from him. And I think you can have the strongest athlete possible, but if they don't move well and they don't pitch with good mechanics, they're going to be set up for injury, and they're most likely not going to have their potential optimized.
Yeah, guys like Ryan.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So exactly. So guys who are kind of a little more behind the scenes from the biomechanics perspective, like that stuff is so huge. And I think I thought I had some understanding of pitching mechanics and kind of what it took from that perspective until I came here, and my mind was just like, whoa, you got humbled very quickly of, like, in terms of what all actually goes into that, and how to cue and actually coach things, and kind of what goes, what actually goes in and through a pitching coach's mind. And I know I've tried my best to pick their brains as much as possible, because I think there's so much to be learned there. And I think the best way for these player development, organization or entities to kind of grow is to have that collaborative approach, because everybody's got their own specialty, and each part has an individual, role in creating player development and getting that athlete to reach their full potential. And like I said, I've just been amazed by what goes through a pitching coach's mind, how they can look at something and see something. I'm like, I didn't even think about that. Like, yes, that makes so much sense. Like, guys that we have here, a lot of guys want to come down to Port St. Lucie because they come out throwing better, more effectively. They're throwing harder. They're just everything about them. They're stronger. And that's kind of what I know we down here want to put out, is we want people to not want to be injured, want to come down here, but those who come out, they want to use rehab and reconditioning as an opportunity to really revamp and kind of, recondition their body and work on some of the deficits or deficiencies that they had before and come out on the better side. So I think that, that collaborative approach is I think key, and obviously a lot harder to actually implement than, it's a lot easier said than done. But I think there's specifically to here, there's been some very positive strides that have been made. And I think a lot of people are very much so trying to promote that, at least definitely within here at the spring training kind of complex here year round. It's been awesome to see the growth of just what we've had here, with that collaboration. So I think that's something that everybody should strive to achieve, and be humbled and have some professional humility to not be like, I know everything. It's like, you don't know everything. It's, you got to ask. If you don't know, you got to seek to understand and to learn. And like I said, I've learned a ton since I've been down here, and I know I will continue to learn a ton each year that I'm down here. That's why this is a great spot to be in. So, obviously hope I continue to advance my way upwards, but at the same time, you got to appreciate where you're at and kind of the things that you can learn in each individual role that you have. So, a lot of good things to be gained for sure.
The high performance model, man, that you're talking about, people who want to enact those things, it's exactly what you said. They have to be humble. They have to recognize everyone's got a place at the table. But the one thing too that I think is important is having some centralized data that everybody kind of understands, and for me, my message is always strength matters most. And I think this is a place in which we can educate the skill coaches that may not have the understanding of joint specific strength, so that they can understand that when an athlete does have a change, and we made program changes often based on this. Sometimes we took athletes out of competition if they didn't have certain strength measures, but we can utilize this now. Okay, this thing impacts the training program and the preventative program. This particular strength measure now affects workload, or we can look at the dietitian, is there something going on nutritionally that's affecting this athlete's strength? And so, that's the beauty. That's what I'm excited about this company for, is it's going to give people a common place. We need to educate them. And I like what you're talking about, these kind of organic conversations that you're having with the people you work with. You're educating them, they're educating you. People are understanding how everyone fits. And I think when we get to that place where strength becomes the central figure, they know that, you were saying, obviously mechanics are important, but it doesn't matter, in my opinion, how you throw. If you're weak, you're still going to be exposed to greater injury risk, right? So if there's a way in which we can tier these things, we can make changes. And one of the other things that we looked at with the Angels, I talked to a high school athletic trainer, and he said, I give this report to my coaches. It's a treatment report. They basically, get an understanding of how I'm working with the athlete. They're not injured, but basically when I'm putting my hands on them and doing therapy. And when he mentioned this, I was like, what, that's crazy. I'm like, what we listen to every day? We listen to the injury report. We listen to the players that are hurt and can't perform, but we don't know what they're receiving as far as therapy and treatment. They're still able, for us as a strength coach, they show up in the weight room, they're not on an injury report, we just train the heck out of them. They go on the field, they're not on the injury report, we throw the heck out of them, and then when this report came about and we started to talk about this is again a central place that we could all talk about. It's like, this is your if you have a green, yellow, and red light system, this is your yellow light. When this athlete's saying, hey man, he's got a lot of lumbar sacral pain and we're doing a ton of work there, it's like, oh, well, that's weird. I have him squatting at 75% of his RM. Now I got to change something here to get this athlete out of pain and dysfunction. And I think, those things are going to be important when we can match the two. We have a good concept of strength. And then, our strength coaches, our pitching coaches, the people that are working with our athletes have a good concept of treatment. What's going on anatomically for this athlete. It'll put all those pieces together that I think you guys have really solved, it sounds like. And I think the way that you're monitoring too, as rigorously as you can and as often as you can, and being able to tier the athlete, here's my injured guy, they need a little bit more attention here. Here's my healthy guy, we're going to watch him. I think you got a really good process. That's a really good model.
Hey, I'd like to focus back on injury, and we're seeing injuries at every level right now. And I'm just curious, when someone comes to you after Tommy John, and how do you go about setting up the milestones that they need to hit to return to play and return to performance? And if I'm a high school kid who's coming off Tommy John, what am I doing that's going to, what advice would you give them for their milestones that they've got to hit if they don't have a team working with them?
Yeah, I think definitely at the high school level, it can be a bit more challenging with the access of what you have. It's a little bit more incumbent upon, the kid himself to actually, carry out some of the home, like rehab and programming, say with the high school athletic trainer or, their whatever physical therapist they're seeing, to kind of for rehab. So I definitely think that makes it a bit more challenging. Kind of starting out specifically to kind of some of the things we'll do here and I've seen and done in the past. I think, like I mentioned with that rehab entrance meeting, I think is an awesome way to start. Like I said, it gets the athlete in the room, gets all the members of the high performance team in the room, gets everything of starting out from, your nutrition, your sleep, and, your mental skills coaches, and you're from a mental health, because I'm pretty, big on that, treating your mental health like you do your physical health, because rehab is challenging. Anybody who's been taken out of their, environment, especially in season, what that does to you from a psychological perspective. So I think if you don't have your mind or head in the right space, and I don't think your body is going to be able to follow, and that's only going to create this, these thought viruses and these other, negative things that happen. So, I'm a big proponent of that. We have mental skills coaches here that I think are a huge kind of part of our, collaborative team that we have here, and that are, full-time with us, which is awesome. So I think, that's great. But again, it gives time for player and like performance team and staff to kind of merge together and kind of talk out what general, timelines might be like. We definitely don't like to be truly time based in terms of a lot of our progressions. We like to be a little bit more criterion based, but at the same time, in order, you're expected at these various time points to meet these specific criteria based
Right.
on, seeing a lot of different athletes. So it's like, we don't with anything like to necessarily be time based, but at the same time, at the end of the day, front office needs numbers and they need to know generally when athletes are going to be back. So in some way you kind of have to be time based, but you expect, like I said, that you expect them to meet certain criteria. So that's kind of how we'll pitch that to an athlete. These are our general time points. If you meet these specific criteria at these various time points, you will continue to move throughout. We always give them the caveat that not many TJ rehabs go without some setback. Normally you'll encounter something where you got to make some small modification of the program, nothing that's going to significantly alter, the overall timing or progression of things. But, I like to give them a pretty good, layout, be like, look, this is an opportunity for you to use the rehab process as an opportunity to recondition and reinvent your body. So things that you had wanted to work on in the past and maybe didn't get around to it or didn't go super well, let's use that as a time to improve XYZ thing based on your spring training numbers of certain things. Let's clear up all that and improve all that. Shoulder strength or some kind of range of motion stuff down. Let's clear up all that. You want to gain a little bit more, strength in your legs. Let's use an opportunity for that. Let's really match what you want to do and what we want to do and what we feel is best for you and what you feel is best for you. And let's create that good plan. But also letting them know that, that process is long. I mean, it's 13, 14 months, for a whole, and sometimes up to 15 months for a starter. I mean, it's a long haul. It's a grind. It's when you get to the dog days of TJ rehab, which is in the bullpen progression. I mean, we'll have our guys throw up to 15 bullpens sometimes based on the athlete. I mean, it can be a grind. It takes a while. So, definitely kind of preparing them for that mental battle, I think, is huge, because the more they know up front, the more they'll be able to prepare their mind for and kind of understand and recognize what it's like. Because obviously it's a challenging process. So like I said, the more they know, the better they're going to be prepared for it. So that's kind of generally how I like to kind of preface it and kind of answer any questions that they have on the front end, so they can make sure that they're in the right headspace for that.
Transparency.
Exactly. Yeah. I like to give them any, if they need any like anecdotal examples, or if they need like, look, this is kind of what I would expect you to be feeling those first 7 to 10 days when you're in a sprint. Like, these are some things we're going to do. This is how quickly we're going to get you into the weight room. This is how we're going to modify things. This is generally when you're going to start, playing catch. This is generally when you're going to do this, and keep giving them those little tidbits of things to look forward to. Because the anticipation of some of those timelines, you just tell a kid that is going to be a long process, you're going to throw somewhere around this time frame, they have that in their mind the whole time. I can't wait to get to that time point because I just want to pick up a ball again, because that's what all these pitchers live to do, is they just want to touch a ball, they want to throw a ball. So giving them some of those time points, like I said, gives them a little bit of that kind of anticipation and kind of motivation to kind of keep going. Obviously always putting the caveat that things could go slower, or potentially slower. You can slow down healing, you can't speed it up. So we always, need to make sure we're respecting the biological healing and stuff like that. So, but generally we'll have, stitches in 7 to 10 days, and we take them out of that. We'll put them in a hinged elbow brace. As soon as they're in the hinged elbow brace, we'll normally use some kind of water resistant kind of tegaderm or bioocclusive, put that on their incision. They're in the weight room. As soon as they get their stitches out, that tegaderm
and tegadermal biocclusion.
Biocclusive, yeah.
For those of the, I'm not asking for me; it's for a friend.
Yeah, it's a water resistant patch you put over the incision. So basically, it keeps any water or kind of sweat or bacteria out of the incision, because until that heals, that's obviously what you're trying to prevent as much as possible. So we'll get them in there, and we'll basically use that, put them in quote unquote upper extremity protection mode. So they'll just in there, say if it's their right arm, they'll do full lifts on their left arm. They'll do lower body lifts, obviously modified with we'll get them into a trap bar. Not a trap bar, a safety bar, and kind of get them going with their lower body stuff. And, they're pretty much using everything on full except for their injured limb. And they start that as soon as stitches come out. And then it's kind of starting them with some isometrics and some lower level forearm stuff, and get them rolling with gripping as much as possible. I like to emphasize and get them going on active motion and strengthening stuff as soon as possible. Normally that's done a little bit at lower level, but you're trying to maximize, you're loading their shoulder up as much as you can. You use cuff weights, you start above the elbow until they can start, until you can start unlocking the brace. You want to load the shoulder and the tissues that you can load as quickly as possible. You want to try to minimize that gap, even though it is a long process, but you want to try to minimize the deficits that they're going to, or the decrements in strength that they're going to get generally throughout the process, at least early on. So we're trying to load them up as soon as possible, get them going with their individual grip strengthening, not just doing general grip. You're doing 2-finger grip strength, middle finger grip strength, and then your 2-finger ring and your pinky finger isometric holds with strengthening, with manuals, various different tubing gripping exercises. I mean, trying to be as creative as possible to give them variety in their program early on, when you're not really doing a ton of stuff. But I think guys here are surprised at how we're doing hip manuals. We do a lot of manual resistance here, a ton of manual resistance with perturbations, with rhythmic stabs, a lot of manual resisted exercises in a whole, just to give them that variability within their training. We do a lot of balance stuff. We do a lot of hip manual work. We have a hip manual series that we'll put guys through that just absolutely blows them up, and they are just can't walk for the next 5 minutes. And it's great because they're coming out of there with that whole, a bit more of a whole body fatigue that I think can be a missing link, because we know that balance deficits and issues has a translation to, how well you move and the balance you have, and UCL injury risk on the mound. So, we incorporate balance, hip stuff, core stuff is incorporated every Monday and Friday. We kind of break things down with like our high days. We keep our highs on the highs and lows on our lows. So we'll go, it's like a Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and Monday, Friday, guys are doing a core circuit. That's, again, as soon as they get their stitches out, we try to keep them in the first 10 days where they're not sweating, try to minimize, because again, that is an incision that you don't want to get them to sweat very much early on. But, we'll incorporate a lot of balance stuff and some lower level stuff just to kind of keep some stimulus into the tissue until, they come out and they get into a brace. But it's really train them up. It's, you protect the injured body part, and you basically train the crap out of them the rest of the ways. And we tell our strength coach, no right arm, it's like they got 35 different variations of things that they can do and train things in a different way, to achieve these different, goals that we have for them. So I think that part of it's great. But I think guys, when they come here, they're very surprised, and we let them know that early on. It's like, look, as soon as you come out and get into a brace, you're in the weight room. You're going to be doing pretty much full lifts of everything except for that right arm, to help to prepare their mind for that. Because a lot of guys after think it's going to be, it's going to be a big lull phase. We're going to do light weights, 1 pound, 2 pound, 3 pounds. Like, no, I want to get you going. I want you building up as much as we can. I want to minimize that as much as possible, as long as we're, we're respecting the healing process and not getting any irritation within the flexors and whatnot, which I haven't seen as much with some of the newer UCL, approaches of what they're doing in the flexor, common flexor, like splitting approach that they're doing. I haven't seen as much of that. So it's really get them rolling and doing as much as they can as early on, and creating as much variability within the training that we can, to create, always new stimuluses, new variability, keep the athletes engaged, I think is huge. And then once they get out closer to like 10, 12 weeks, we'll start, or 8, 10 weeks, we'll get them up into that 90-90 strengthening. We'll start their progressions up in there. We start plyos around 14 or 12 weeks, one arm plyos at 16 weeks, 12 weeks, 14 weeks, one arm plyos. 16 weeks, we'll start our like weighted ball plyo carry drills, which again, we don't use that as from a velocity gain standpoint. We use that from a movement patterning and efficiency standpoint. And that's where our rehab pitching coach plays a huge role for us, because they've now just spent 16 weeks developing strength and building that great foundation with our performance coaches, with us, and with everybody as a whole, developing that base. And now we need to start to blend all that strengthening stuff and rehab stuff, now start to blend in more of the pitching specific work. And so we'll start to integrate our plyos for that from more of a movement patterning standpoint, to improve our pitch efficiency and how well these guys move, and then start to blend that over a couple of weeks and blend that into throwing somewhere in 18 to 20 weeks. So normally we'll get guys thrown in there, and then it's a 30 to 34 week throwing program until they're getting into games. And, and it's obviously varied throughout that of how many bullpens and how many lives they need based on if they're a starter, if they're a reliever, kind of what the expectation is from the organization. So we always, are keeping up to date and doing a needs assessment with our front office of what the expectation is for this athlete, what's the time of the year when they got injured, and kind of generally how long a lot of these, injuries as a whole are going to take. So that we definitely incorporate a lot of those kind of components in to make sure it's as holistic as as possible. But it's like I said, it's a long process. And, I think it's a little bit easier here. It's just the timing of things make it tough of, where the season's at, based on how long it's going to take to come back. There's fall league, there's winter ball, there's other options if you're not going to, necessarily throw in season. But we normally will crush, my philosophy is I try to crush guys with arm care and strengthening as much as possible. And then as soon as they start getting into throwing, when they're getting closer to 90 feet, then you start to drop the arm care a bit, since pitching and more of the task specific work is going to start to take over a little bit more of the stimulus from that point. You can't completely think you're going to fatigue them with all this arm care stuff and have them throw and have them continue to adapt and, feel ready to go each time they throw. Like there's got to be, as all the functional stuff goes up, then obviously a little bit of your strengthening and more of your pure stuff like that has got to come down to help to match and blend that stuff together. So I normally find that when it'll take up to when guys start to get to around 75, 90 feet, that I can keep them pretty high, throwing in some deload weeks in there with strengthening. You can't just keep going for, 30 weeks in a row and then expect them to feel good every day. You got to throw some deloads in there too, which I think is a little bit of a pearl that I haven't seen a lot of clinicians do. When you see, and you got to read each athlete, you can't be like, oh, built in at week whatever, I'm going to have a deload week of strengthening for this. It's like, no, you got to play it with the ebbs and flows of the season, with how the athlete is. If you feel like they're looking like they're really tired, you notice their weights are having to decrease their weights because they're just getting fatigued, their just overall morale is down, and you touch base with them, and you just generally get the feeling that they're fatigued. You notice their strength and their objective numbers are down a bit or just kind of stalling. It's like, maybe it's a good time for a little bit of a deload, build them back up, get them kind of rest and recovered, and allow them to keep going. Because once they have a good strength base, I mean, you take a week and a half, where you're only strengthening 3 days a week. And normally once they come back from that deload, they feel fantastic. And we try to merge those times from a strengthening perspective and rehab perspective to really give them a week and a half, every 8 weeks throughout the program, to kind of build them down, because we know that we're strengthening them and giving them a high sufficient stimulus. Like we know that there's not an underloading issue. We know that if anything, it's potentially an overloading issue. So we know that we have to build in those deload weeks because of what these guys are getting on a day-to-day basis. And I think it provides an increase kind of task on us, just from because we do a lot of manual work, a lot of perturbations. No, most guys will not do anything where they're just doing bands, where they're doing weights, or they're doing whatever. There's always a tempo variation. We always are in there giving them some rhythmic staves. We're adding some holds and tempos. There's always some kind of training variations that we have within that. And I think that is also another thing that is missed a lot of times in programming, is being able to periodize that stuff throughout, and having potentially a day where you have a concept like a speed strength or speed focus, a day where you have an eccentric focus, a day where you have an isometric focus, and you're kind of doing a little bit of that French contrast stuff where you're kind of blending all these different things in together, and then doing some periodization where then you're kind of merging them all together, and you're kind of doing that fluctuation of whatnot of what might happen throughout a general, periodization, cycle and whatnot. So I think that's stuff that's, often missed, as
I'm pumped. I'm ready to go work out right now after listening to all that, man. I feel like I'm not doing enough right now. So.
No, but it's just some stuff that I think the guys, like, I know our guys have gotten a lot of buy-in because they see we provide a lot of the hands-on treatment, not only with manual stuff, but just with the perturbations, that to them, they perceive it like we care more, if that even makes a whole lot of sense. But that's what we've been told, because we're not ever sitting around. We're not ever just sitting there talking. We're always kind of doing something, trying to be as active and as, helpful as possible. So we know that guys generally get a little bit more out of that when they have hands on them, because what athlete doesn't like to have some kind of hands on them to help to, facilitate some things. So, it's kind of some things that I've learned, and I'm definitely very passionate about adding and trying to make sure that they're getting as much as they can, with each exercise. So
yeah, when I'm like thinking about this, and I mean, let's just say I'm a young athlete, or there's a coach that's listening to this who's got an athlete that's injured. I mean, you're communicating so much work that needs to be done, and that has to be in the athlete's brain. And not only work, but they're challenging themselves in a lot of different ways. You're not looking at these guys like they're broken. You know what I mean? When I'm hearing this, it's like, hey, now you're mine. We're going to get after it. You're coming out better. Here you have goals. So this is something too that a young athlete might not have. They get their outpatient report and their programs from the physical therapist and say, hey, go get them for the next few weeks. And they're not making those adjustments. They don't have goals. The athlete needs to have some conversation with their therapist of, where do I need to be? and if there is an objective process, if they are monitoring their strength, where does my arm strength have to be? Because an ineffective return to performance program, I don't even like saying rehabilitation, because I'm thinking just like you, Luke, and this is what players need to think. Hey, I'm going to either return to performance or I'm going to an exceed performance program. That if they have objective criteria, this is what we need to give our young athletes. They need to know they're goal directed, they're competitive. We need to give them that information. If we tell an 18-year-old who's just undergone the knife, that we give them, a report that they go and train with, and there's no checking in, or they're not giving some expectations, they're going to perform below the line. You set a high standard for yourself, and we got to get our athletes, our coaches, to set a high standard for them and saying, when you come back, you got to be a monster. Obviously, like I liked what you said, you don't disrupt the healing process, but you are doing everything possible to keep strong. There's a kid on my block. He's an offensive lineman. He rolled his ankle. I think he fractured something, but he's off his feet. And I talked to his parents and say, hey, what's he doing? Oh, well, the physical therapist and the physician, they just want him to rest for a while. They don't want him to do anything really for a while, to manage the inflammation. And I kept thinking to myself, I'm like, man, this kid who's a power athlete, needs absolute strength, is sitting on the couch. When he loves to bench press, he can do rows, he can do pull downs, he could do a seated leg press with one leg. Like there's so much that these athletes can do. And hearing this is unbelievable. It's like you're getting them to performance right away. You're minimizing those strength losses. And young kids don't know this stuff. They're not educated in this way. And as coaches, I mean, if I'm a coach and I got a kid on the shelf, yeah, I want to take some responsibility for him. I'm going to communicate with the physical therapist. I'm going to have conversations with them. I say, what are all the things I can do with this athlete without disrupting, their healing and recovery? Because if I have that in mind, I'm pushing the pedal to the metal. You get a high school kid, Jordan undergoes the knife as a high schooler. Maybe he's a junior. He's losing opportunities to be scouted. We saw it when we were in the draft room. There are certain players who are like, well, we don't know what he's going to be like, because if we bring him in, we already have a big RTP program. We already have a lot of athletes to rehabilitate. And sometimes those kids get left alone, and they're on their by the wayside. And you're creating something that is the key word for me, is accountability. We have to teach our young athletes they got to be accountable for their health when they're healthy, and they got to be accountable for their recovery when they're injured. They have to do the work. So, man, this is awesome to hear.
Yeah, I think that this is great. Luke, thank you for being on. We're at an hour. We could probably go on and on. Would love to hear more. I can tell. I mean, just listening to you talk, you said you were passionate about it. It's obvious how passionate you are about it. And if I was coming in there, I'd be stoked for sure to be in there. So yeah, listen, thank you. Jordan, Ryan, you got anything else or?
No,
Nothing.
Great podcast.
All right. Yeah, great podcast. And, if you guys have anyone listening, please subscribe. If you got any questions, please reach out to us. We'll get back. And, until next time, take care.